the Russian assault on Sumy has crumbled. And this failure has laid bare just how unprepared Russian President Vladimir Putin's forces truly are, as his troops were seen escaping the Ukrainian region using scooters. Yes, scooters. With Putin's offensive in the key border region now in ruins, he must confront a stark reality. His military might not have the resources needed to sustain what he calls a special military operation. On April 2nd, Euromaidan press detailed Russia's latest push into Ukrainian territory. Their target? Sumy. This region, located along the border between Russia and Ukraine, sits next to Kursk, which Ukraine launched a counter-offensive against in August 2024. As clashes continue in Kursk, Euromaidan press reports that fallen soldiers are piling up along the border. Why is this important? Russia has spent months trying to reclaim Kursk. Sumy is merely a secondary target. Putin believes that by seizing Kursk, he could establish a direct path into Sumy, gaining yet another piece of land that doesn't belong to him. But Ukraine had other plans, as evidenced by Russia's latest defeat. It began with a bold Russian maneuver. As Putin's troops engaged Ukrainian forces in Kursk, they managed to push them back towards Sumy. This seemed like a win for Russia, as it meant regaining a portion of territory lost in August. However, Putin wasn't satisfied with just that. As Ukraine's forces withdrew, Russian troops attempted to chase them down with a full-on assault. But the Ukrainians weren't retreating in defeat. They were falling back to planned defensive lines. Ukrainian soldiers regrouped in the villages of Rubinshchina and Gogolevka, setting up strategic fallback positions. Russia pressed forward. What followed was a grueling three-day battle, particularly in Rubinshchina, where Russian forces got caught up in heavy fighting instead of advancing on Sumy. A direct assault on Ukrainian positions wasn't viable, according to Euromaidan press. So Russia tried a different strategy, encircling Ukraine's withdrawing troops along the Kursk-Sumy border. The problem? Most of Ukraine's forces had already completed their withdrawal, leaving Russia fighting a battle with little to gain. On the surface, this still seemed like a potential victory for Russia. Even though Putin's troops had lost track of most of their fleeing opponents, surrounding even a portion of them could mean eliminating some of Ukraine's forces. Additionally, with many Ukrainians now repositioned, Russia expected to bring overwhelming numbers to the fight in Sumy. With that in mind, Russia shifted its focus more into the Sumy Oblast, aiming for the areas of Basivka and Novenka. The logic was clear. Controlling those locations would give Russia command over the highway connecting Sumy to Shutar. That road is vital, serving as both a Ukrainian supply route and a critical access point for retreating troops. Capturing it would give Russia a logistical advantage, cutting off Ukraine's ability to maneuver effectively. But things didn't go as planned. Russia's offensive in Sumy ended in a disastrous failure, forcing its forces into a chaotic retreat. And the most humiliating aspect? Some of Putin's soldiers were caught on video desperately fleeing on scooters. This leads to a crucial question. How did Russia's Sumy offensive fail so spectacularly? The answer lies in Kursk. After Ukraine pushed into the Russian region in August 2024, Putin spent months assembling a force strong enough to reclaim lost ground. By November, Russia had amassed 50,000 troops in Kursk, nearly 5 times the number stationed there before Ukraine's attack. Among them were 10,000 soldiers provided by North Korea under a defense agreement. At the time, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky acknowledged the situation, stating, "Our men are holding back. 50,000 of the occupiers' troops who, because of the Kursk operation, cannot be deployed elsewhere." That alone was a victory for Ukraine. Tying up so many Russian forces in Kursk meant easing pressure on other Ukrainian regions. But it also meant that Ukrainian troops in Kursk were facing an enormous threat. Over the past several months, Putin's counteroffensive in Kursk has gained ground. By March 13th, Russia's defense ministry claimed to have recaptured 100 square miles out of the 450 initially lost to Ukraine, along with several settlements. By April, Russia had regained control of most of Kursk, centering its efforts on Sudzha. This should have been good news for Russia. Reclaiming Kursk could serve as a springboard for an invasion into Sumy. And that's exactly what Putin attempted. But there was a problem. His forces were exhausted. Euromaidan press reports that Russia's 50,000-strong counteroffensive force in Kursk came at an enormous cost. Estimates suggest that Russia lost 55,000 soldiers in the process, 5,000 more than it originally sent. That means Putin's effort to retake Kursk resulted in a net loss of troops, exposing the brutal meat grinder tactics his forces have been forced to rely on. Those casualties, spread over 7.5 months, translate to a staggering 7,300 Russian losses per month. The situation got so dire that Russia had to deploy reserve troops, including previously wounded soldiers, just to keep the momentum going. The equipment situation was equally grim. Kursk's counteroffensive drained Russia of up to 2,100 military vehicles, including 750 armored units. With so much lost in Kursk, the Sumy offensive was doomed before it even began. Geolocated footage from Sumy's failed attack confirms Russia's severe equipment shortages. The video shows Russian soldiers riding scooters and quad bikes in open fields, tracked by Ukrainian reconnaissance drones. Alongside scooter-mounted troops, Russia sent forces in civilian vehicles and, in some cases, on foot. The plan was to overrun Ukrainian defenses through sheer numbers, but depleted ranks and a lack of protection doomed the effort. As the footage continues, Ukrainian artillery rains down on the exposed Russian troops, destroying scooters and forcing a disorganized retreat. Ukrainian drones strike relentlessly, eliminating dozens of soldiers before they can even reach Sumy's outskirts. The key takeaway? Putin's strategy is clear. He wants to use Kursk as a staging ground to seize Sumy while encircling retreating Ukrainian troops. But his military simply lacks the resources to pull it off. Ukraine successfully repositioned its troops, leaving Russian forces stranded and vulnerable. As Euromaidan Press put it, dead Russian infantry piling up in the forests leading into Sumy make the prospect of any large-scale Russian offensive increasingly unfeasible. Does this mean Putin will abandon Sumy? Absolutely not. Despite the catastrophic failure of his encirclement attempt, Russia has continued targeting Sumy. On March 24th, a brutal Russian missile strike injured 94 civilians, including 23 children, according to the Sumy City Council. Infrastructure and residential areas were devastated, with high-rise buildings, homes, warehouses, medical facilities, and offices all damaged. Putin appears determined to capture Sumy before a potential temporary ceasefire, which is meant to prevent attacks on energy infrastructure, takes effect. On March 29th, Russia claimed to have captured the small border village of Veselivka, Oris El Evkar, a settlement of just 60 people. At only 18 miles from Sumy, it could serve as a launching point for future attacks, assuming Putin has the forces left to make that happen. As of April 3rd, Russian bombardments have intensified. The Ukraine Crisis Media Center reports nearly 50 glide bombs were dropped on Sumy in 24 hours. However, as Russia pounds Sumy from the air, its ground forces are in shambles. On the same day as its bombing campaign, Russia lost 122 artillery units, a devastating blow. The failure in Sumy is not an isolated incident. Putin's forces are increasingly relying on outdated vehicles and exhausted troops. With heavy armor depleting and human losses mounting, Russia faces an unsustainable situation. But will that stop Putin from throwing more troops into the fire? Not likely.